Hello, possibility seekers. It's me again. I have a very interesting and very, very smart guest today who's going to tell us a lot about things that are always on our minds as executive women, women in leadership, women aspiring to leadership. She's awesome. I met her at my day of badassery, which that's a conversation for a different day, but she's pretty badass. So her name is Jamie Lee. Jamie Lee is a certified executive coach who helps smart women who hate office politics get promoted and better paid without throwing anybody under the bus. In her practice, she blends the best of proven negotiation strategies with evidence-based neuroplasticity tools so her clients lead and advocate with confidence and ease. A South Korean immigrant, Jamie first learned the value of self-advocacy from the example of her mother, who single-handedly raised 3 daughters while running a nail salon and speaking broken English in New Jersey. Over a decade, Jamie has trained thousands of professionals in effective self-advocacy and workplace negotiation at leading organizations, including, but not limited to, Citi, Unilever, Jefferies, UC Berkeley School of Business, and Smith College, among many others. Welcome, Jamie. It is so good to see you.
Thank you so much, Monique. Thank you so much for having me on Possibilities.
That's the name of the game. You create possibilities in everything you do. That's why we want to unpack all of that with you. This is awesome. So we share many, many commonalities, but one of which is being immigrants. So this is cool. Hey, maybe I met your mom someday along the line. Where in New Jersey were you guys?
Yeah. We first moved to Richfield, and then I went to high school in Leonia, and my mom is in Palisades Park, which is mostly Korean.
Yes, indeed. A Fort Lee and Palisades Park, very much so. So tell me about what that journey was like coming to the States and how old you were and how it all happened for you, your sisters, and your mom. I'm fascinated by the journey.
It was 35 years ago, Monique. I arrived via Koreana Air 747, so I was fresh off the plane, not off a boat.
That's what I say all the time.
And I was 7 years old, 35 years ago, so you can do the math. I'm 42 now, and I thought I was going to land in New York City. For some reason, my parents booked a flight on Christmas Day. And I grew up watching Hollywood movies. I grew up watching, Disney in South Korea, dubbed in Korean, of course. But I imagined that if I landed here, when I landed here, it would be like a Disney fairy tale paradise Mickey Mouse parade. And it wasn't. It was not that at all. It was dreary. It was gray. It was lonely. The streets were empty. It's JFK in the late 80s. And I was like, whoa, this is not the fantasy I had.
And I don't see any Disney princesses at the airport. What's going on?
Yeah.
So tell me about your mom and dad a little bit, and then how you grew up in this household. How was the transition to school and all that good stuff before we start to talk about how you help other women who might very well be in the same place we were?
It wasn't until very recently I started really thinking about it, and I realized it was rather traumatic. When you are displaced from one place to another, nothing terrible happened. When you are uprooted from one life into a completely different context, even when you do have a loving family, even though there is no abuse or anything, it's still a form of trauma that you go through. So now when I think back to that, there is some tenderness that I experienced towards my younger self. My father had moved here by himself for a full year, and he literally had a card table that was just propped up against the wall in the middle of Times Square. And this is Times Square before Giuliani, before it was Disney-fied. And so it was like porn and drug riddled Times Square, where I remember I was 7 years old, and I would shield my baby sister's eyes. She was a toddler. She was like 3 years old. And we're like, she shouldn't see any of this. I probably shouldn't have seen any of that either. But in the middle of that Times Square, my father had a table. And so he was a street vendor. You still see street vendors, you still see immigrant street vendors. And that's what he had. He was selling. I have a picture. I'm looking at the picture right now. I don't know if you could see it, but here, that was the table. That was the business. Yeah, he was selling like sunglasses and knickknacks and bags, and I mean, he had access to a wall, so I guess it's better than like being out on the street itself. And he was a hustler. He was a hustler, and he did that for a year before we all followed him. The rest of the family, me, my two sisters, and my mother. And then once my mother and the whole family was here, they set up a shop, a gift shop in Queens, and they ran that for several years when I was in elementary school.
Right. That's crazy. And so how did you just, this is curious because, there's reasons why you're a certified executive coach today. And I'll throw out some theories after the end of the podcast, but what do you think was between the time you got here at 7 to the time that you are today a successful business owner, giving empowerment and strategies and insights and consulting to women who are not as dynamic as you or trying to be? How did that happen? What transpired in those years?
Yeah, I'll try to make it quick because how, how do I explain 35 years of ups and downs and revelations and evolution? I think the long and the short of it is that when I entered the workforce, after seeing my parents work so hard, they ran a gift shop, they worked in it 364 days. I mean, it was very typical immigrant, just pulling yourselves up by the bootstraps, working incredibly hard, so hard that you start getting sick and your marriage falls apart. It happens a lot more than we'd like to acknowledge. And I saw my parents go through that, and I didn't have this rich uncle who was going to make an introduction to a bank or help me, get my feet into the to like a professional world. Like when I went to Smith College, all women's college, I just sort of had this vague idea that I'll do something that doesn't bind me to one. No idea, because the only role model I really had in my life were my parents, who were just always working and working like laboriously. I mean, like with their physical labor, not really. They were knowledge workers, even though they were back in South Korea. They came here, and so I didn't have an example of what it was like to navigate the workplace. And so when I got into the workplace, it was like a brutal awakening. I'm like, oh, there's so many things I still don't know. How come all the A's that I got in school and through college isn't helping me navigate office politics, isn't helping me negotiate for myself, isn't helping me feel confident in meetings? Yeah. And then that's when I realized, oh, I gotta learn a new set of skills. I gotta learn how to shift my mindset. I have to learn how to communicate. I have to learn how to be confident and ask for the things that I want. And I started to teach myself the things that I hadn't yet been taught. And I realized a big part of that is unlearning. Unlearning the socialization, unlearning this idea that like you just have to always be working, 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 and so many other things. And so I think that's why I became an executive coach, because my experience taught me like you have to learn how to unlearn things and learn new things. And and this might seem a little bit tangential, but like the whole arc of it is that you have to sort of subvert what you think are things that you are supposed to do and the way you think you should be.
So that to me sounds, I mean, I can completely and utterly relate to what you just described and the unlearning and the lack of role models and the lack of connections or any sort of guidance, like guidance on college, guidance on majors, guidance on jobs, guidance on anything, because they didn't have the ability to. Not that they didn't want to, I'm sure, both of our parents. It's this idea that you have to become your own advocate, right?
That's exactly right.
So how do we develop voice? So I love your core principles. And we talked about this before. And I want you to elaborate, if you may, about how you coach and what you surround your core principles and your clients with, so that they leave with a better set of tools in their toolbox.
Yeah, so let me rewind the tape a little bit and talk to you about how I became a coach, how I transitioned from. Okay, let me give you the story. So I worked in procurement. I was negotiating with vendors. I was using my language skills. I used to be a bilingual buyer, so I would negotiate with American vendors in English, and then I would negotiate with South Korean managers. I did that for a while, and then I worked at a hedge fund that was trading Asian equities. So it was my job to sort of, keep a pulse on what's happening on the news and events. And that led to me working through the financial crisis, which was extremely stressful. And then I realized, you know what, this is just not a fit. I want to be working in an environment where I'm better aligned with my values, where my strengths, and I also want to be better appreciated. And that's when I started to read about female entrepreneurs. That's when I started reading about angel investing, about how there are groups of women, accredited investors, who invest just in women-led startups. Right. And because I'm from a family of mostly women, and going back to my story a little bit, my parents eventually got divorced, and my mom raised me single-handedly. So I grew up in a single mother, all women, 3 girls, 1 mom. Yeah. And I went to Smith College, where Gloria Steinem, and there's a lot of feminists who are from that school. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so I wanted to be exposed to that world, and that led me to working in startups. And then I'm like, I want to be entrepreneurial. I want to do something on my own. And then I thought, what can I offer based on my experience so far? And I realized I have some exposure to, the investing world, because I worked in the hedge fund, and now I'm exposed to the startup world. Oh, employees need to learn how to negotiate their startup equity compensation. Right? Because when you work in a startup, you often get compensated with equity. And then I realized, I can teach a class. I can help people better understand what they're being offered when they're being offered, stock grants or options, so that they can better negotiate for themselves. And then I realized, what people really need is the confidence to negotiate in general, especially women.
Yeah. Do you want me to share something with you that Sarah told me? When she was she was the chief revenue officer for Wall Street Journal for a long time. And she told me, some of it comes from data in a book, which was substantiated by her experiences. And the other was just anecdotal, what she experienced over the decade that she was doing this. She said 3 things. One is women ask for raises half as many times as men. When they ask for raises, they ask for 30% less than men. And every time a man has a child, he is automatically in her office asking for a raise. Whereas if a woman had a child, she shut her mouth and would express gratitude for keeping her job.
Yeah, that really breaks my heart. I talk about this in my podcast, Risky Conversations, I do really believe what you're talking about is the fatherhood bonus and motherhood penalty. And I think it's a travesty. And I think that happens as a result of so many things, but one of which is internalized, socialized belief that women should be evaluated based on her contributions rather than her potential. right? So men have a tendency to get rewarded for their potential, what they may do in the future, whereas women are constantly taught to think of themselves as givers and only as good as what you have given so far. So then when you think about yourself in this framework, then when you take time off to give birth to a new consciousness, to new life, it's almost like I have coach clients who felt guilty about taking time off, or who felt like, oh, now maybe I have less of a standing in asking for the promotion and raise that I want. And so that's sort of the subversive part. It's like, okay, we have to question that internalized belief, and then we have to turn it on its head and like think about, actually, what if you become more valuable, not less? What if, your experiences so far and the fact that you are a mother helps you add even more value because you become laser focused on what's important. There's less room for the BS, right? Your empathy is better. You also have to think about what is the value, the future potential of the ideas you will have.
I wanted you to elaborate on the core values that you bring to your clients, just being you and the practice that you've built. What are they and how do they show up?
Yes. So to make the long story short, I started helping women negotiate their salaries, and then I realized, oh no, there's a bigger game to be played. Like, we want to maximize not just paycheck, we want to maximize potential. And that's why I became an executive coach helping women get promoted, get better paid. And the core principles of my coaching practice is that, number one, if it feels awkward speaking up for yourself, you're doing it right.
Yes. Say that again, please.
If it feels awkward speaking up for yourself or asking for what you want, you're doing it right. So often we think that confidence is comfort. That's a confusion, right? Confidence is not comfort. Confidence is your willingness to have your own back, even when it's scary, especially when it's awkward, to take action, to prove to yourself that you can do new things. And so we take that awkwardness of speaking up and we say, you know what? That's not a problem. Yeah. And I think that helps to reduce the anxiety, the tension, and the stress. And when you have less anxiety, tension, and stress, you are more relaxed. And when you are more relaxed, you have access to your creative thinking, you have access to your negotiating brain, you exude more leadership presence, right? And so if it feels awkward, you're doing it right. And number two, that self-advocacy, speaking up for yourself, advocating for yourself, taking the lead is an act of service. It is the very opposite of being selfish and greedy. Like, so often women think, oh, if I ask for the promotion and the raise, or if I ask for those resources I want, it's me being selfish and people will think that I'm being greedy. But that's not always reality. That's actually the way a patriarchal society has conditioned women to second guess ourselves, and for us to be constantly looking over our shoulder and worrying more about what other people think about us rather than thinking more about what actually adds value to this team, to this organization. Because when you do your homework, people will be delighted. Supervisors, managers, the good ones, they will be delighted that you did the work of thinking through what adds value, what drives the goal, what drives the mission.
Now, I was going to say, I just had this conversation this morning with a woman, and I said, my take on the imposter syndrome is that you should always have some of it, a little discomfort, because in discomfort, it's discomfort that you have, not imposter syndrome, really. It's this idea that if you feel uncomfortable, you're doing it right. If you are comfortable, you're not stretching yourself, you're not learning, you're not exposing yourself to things that will have you grow. So if it's comfortable, you're static. You're in status quo. You ain't going nowhere fast. If you're uncomfortable and you think you're maybe imposturing because you're stretching your comfort zone, that's the growth area. That's when you show up as a different human. That's when you show up as a badass. You're not going to be a badass if you're comfortable. No badass I know is comfortable.
Love it. Love it.
And we don't let ourselves be comfortable because guess what? I don't want to be complacent. I want to be constantly learning and challenging myself and learning new things and meeting new people and getting new ideas and taking what you said and contemplate that thought. I think I should implement that. That's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. This brings to mind, I was just coaching a client who is an executive at a consulting firm, and she is like so many leading women, so many of the women that, the person that you have been, as well as people she's one of the only woman. So everyone else is gray-haired, male, pale.
Well, white guys, 50-year-old white guys. I always call them 50-year-old white guys. You got it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, and she's younger, she's got a lot of energy, she's a driver. She's a driving force within that executive team. She is an integral part of that team, but of course she has a little bit smaller title, as is unfortunately too often the case.
Yes.
And we were talking about how she has been so good at advocating for the kinds of changes that she knows will add value to the firm. She knows will help the firm survive the next 100 years of its existence, right? But the person who's at the very top is resistant. And it just seems like this person is in a mood. And they just don't want to hear any sort of feedback that's less than, oh yes, whatever you say.
Don't confuse me with the facts. I've already made up my mind, and you're not going to take me out of that. And don't move my cheese.
Right, exactly. Don't move my cheese. And we were talking about this, and we were talking about how, okay, what is the worst that can possibly happen? And she's not going to lose her job. She's too integral to the whole operation. But the worst that can happen is that it's uncomfortable. Just having somebody who may feel, let's say, threatened by somebody who is a different gender, somebody who is younger, somebody who's got energy, somebody who's got lots of ideas. And so, what we arrived at was like, we can even bring some compassion, right? Like, she doesn't have to see this as a problem. We could just see it as like, yeah, of course there's discomfort. So of course there's discomfort from, the people who are male, pale, slightly stale.
Male, pale, and slightly stale. Wait, hold on, people. That is a great quote. Say it again.
Male, pale, and slightly stale. And here's the analogy that we arrived at. I think a lot of people who are listening to this will resonate with this. It's like, can you imagine how Kamala Harris felt in June 2024 after the disastrous debate that had happened, but before Biden stepped down, right? Can you imagine like how she had to hold her breath, she had to be patient, but she also had to be prepared, and how awkward and uncomfortable that would have felt for her. And I think a lot of people who are listening to this can resonate with that. They'll be like, yeah, that's how it always feels like for me. But what we do know is that there's also a change happening. There's a wave of change happening. There is a, what is it, multiple $1 trillion transfer of wealth. There's also transfer of leadership. People call it the silver wave. The male, pale, and slightly stale folks, many of them are retiring, and many women of color, many women who are immigrants, many women who have been silent. It's going to be their opportunity to step up, and sometimes just allowing for the discomfort before, throughout the process is just part of the process, and nothing has gone wrong.
Yeah, there's a gentleman by the name of Don Warden. I'm interviewing his number 2 soon, and he wrote a book that is based on research called Here Come the Girls, which speaks to exactly what you're speaking to and about. And it's a tidal wave that is happening, and it's making people uncomfortable, which makes people become resistant to change, and even more grounded in their don't confuse me with the facts, I've made up my mind, put my blinders on, leave me alone, don't move my cheese, all those things. And that happens in the course of business, in life, politics, the whole thing. You are messing with the status quo, and I don't like it, is sort of the thematic. So, okay. So I don't know if I want to go off the reservation and ask you some other follow-up questions, because honestly, there's so much I want to unpack. Why is it so important that busy executive and professional women, but basically everybody, have an advocate or a coach to help them through this process? What are you finding in your practice?
I feel there are two parts to that question because when I think about advocate, I think about how you could have a mentor, you could have a champion, you could have an ally, right? And it's so important. I talked to Caroline Stokes and gosh, what's her name? Ludmila Provislova. They co-wrote a book about dealing with office bullies, workplace bullies. And the conclusion was that at the end of the day, do you have people? Do you have a friend at work? Do you have somebody that you can trust, you can talk to? Even if you are the only woman at that executive suite, like do you have somebody you can go to and have, you know, an open, honest conversation with? Because that makes a huge difference if you do experience, somebody who becomes like kind of like a schoolyard bully because they don't want their cheese moved, or they feel threatened by the change to the status quo. So I think yes, like having an advocate, having a friend, having an ally, it could make a huge difference in your overall career satisfaction, in your longevity, in emotional resilience. Yeah. But I think having a coach, I'm a coach, I'm totally biased. I have a coach. I've been getting coached for years and years, and it's completely changed my life. I mean, I really do feel like I am an example of what's possible when you get coached. Because if I didn't get exposed to causal coaching, like getting to the root cause of the problem, questioning limiting beliefs, and creating a vision for the life I want, and making decisions ahead of time. If I didn't have a coach, I think like I would not have done anything I've done, obviously, as a coach, but my life would have been qualitatively so subpar, substandard to what is possible. Yeah, I think I would say like depressed, angry, anxious, underpaid, like always just tense. Having said that, I think to directly answer your question, why is it important to have a coach? I was thinking about this, Monique, and I think you might appreciate this analogy. I feel like a good coach, a great coach, and there's so many of them, thank goodness, people can find them. They're like windshield wipers. They're like windshield wipers as you drive the car through a storm, a rainstorm, a snowstorm, a hailstorm. Like, can you drive without them? Maybe. Can you see? I mean, like on a clear day, yeah. On a clear day, if there is no storm, of course you can navigate and there's no problem, sure. But the coaches, I'm doing the gesture because like we have internal barriers, we have external barriers, and sometimes it's just that clear, objective perspective that we often lose, not because there's anything wrong with us, but because when you are driving through a storm, there's so much information coming at you, and you don't always have the wherewithal or the bandwidth to decide what's most important. How do I see ahead as opposed to just being obsessed about what's in my rearview mirror? How do I look into the future and make clear-eyed decisions and have a wider, broader, objective perspective? So I think that's what coaches do for you. And that doesn't mean that you only need coaches when things are going bad. I think coaches can also help you when things are going well, create an even bigger vision for the life that you genuinely want to have.
I think that you and I are very well. We've known this as soon as we met, that we're very aligned on a bunch of things. And I did also have a business coach who turned out to be actually a life coach, in a lot of ways, a life coach for me. What you're describing, how it lands for me, is people often give their lives a default status, not a designed status. So I think when we as humans want to take control of our destinies and how we show up and how we conduct our lives and how we conduct our businesses and what's important and what's our value system and what is all of that, you need intentionality, you need planning, and God, you need action. So those three things, I think the coaching process allows you to be much more intentional about the what do I want and how do I want to get there versus I'm on the hamster wheel and it's Tuesday and I'm still spinning. That's how it lands for me. It's this intentionality that we're not born with. We have to develop it through mistakes, through being uncomfortable, through having advocates, and through having coaches. And so, you know, in the fifth and sixth chapter of my book, I talk about internal narratives and external narratives. And the internal narrative is the little voice inside your head and your self-limiting beliefs. And the question that I have for you, the segue is, how detrimental do you think limiting beliefs are to people's successes?
I want to give a nuanced answer to that because, first of all, I think you're spot on. I like to call that little voice the itty bitty shitty committee. That's something I also learned from one of my coaches early in my journey, and it just stayed with me. It's the itty bitty shitty committee because there's like a committee of voices that we have internalized, and they want us to stay itty and bitty and feeling shitty. But the reason why I want to give a nuanced answer is that, first of all, I think, I mean, I've been doing this personal development coaching work for years and years. I do it every single day. I work on my limiting beliefs every single day, Monique.
Trust me, I'm right there with you, girlfriend. It doesn't happen overnight.
And the thing that I try to disabuse my clients of as soon as possible is this idea of perfectionism, that it's somehow possible to completely get rid of a limiting belief. Because when we start thinking, oh, I have to get rid of it, I have to stop thinking it that way, and when we're mired in the resistance, what we resist only persists.
Yes, I say that all the time.
Yeah. And the thing that I hope my clients see is sometimes a limiting belief, like let me give you an example. I've been coaching clients who are like me, you know, people of color, women of color who have great ideas but struggle to speak up, like in a large meeting or getting their voices heard. And the limiting belief may be, it's not okay for me to speak up because if they don't like what I have to say, it means I'm not good enough. In other words, I need people to approve of me for me to be safe. But sometimes you want to think about, have there been times where that thought actually served me? Has it helped me get to where I am today? Has it helped me do well in school as a kid, as somebody who needed the approval of the authorities, the people in charge, the teachers, in order for you to feel safe within the system, right? And I think people of color might kind of resonate with that because they feel like, yeah, I didn't want to stick out. I didn't want to stand out because then they can call me names, they can hurt me, they can abuse me, right? And so we want to acknowledge that, yes, we all have limiting beliefs, and there are positive intentions beneath all beliefs, even if they feel shitty, even if they seem to be a detriment to your surface level success. Because we want to acknowledge that all beliefs are there to help keep you alive, and protected, right? When we could connect with that positive intention, we'd be like, oh, oh, it just wants me to be okay. It just wants me to watch out and be safe. I got it. Now you can make conscious acknowledgement of that unconscious intention. And I think that helps to loosen the grip. It helps to loosen that resistance. And then you could also say, okay, there's always going to be a part of me that wants me to just be safe. And I can acknowledge that. And I can also acknowledge there's a part of me that wants to go for expansion and growth.
Yeah, I think also, if I may add to, for me, the idea that people would, I mean, since I was 5 and I got here, it was always, you can't. You can't because you can't because you're different. You can't because you haven't mastered the language. You can't because you're too short. You can't because you're too chubby. You can't because you're too whatever. And for me, it drove me. It's like, yeah, you think so? And bullied, right? So I was bullied, and and I told you this story. So the moment that I took control of that narrative, it was like, do not think that you can take advantage of this, because it's not going to happen for you. Now, until that point, to your point, you have to acknowledge. I mean, what does a 5-year-old have? They don't have tools to, a 7-year-old, a 10-year-old have. They don't have the tools to acknowledge or to discern what is actually happening. What they have the tools to do is decide fight or flight. Those are the decisions you have as a child. Those are the decisions you have as an adult. Those are the decisions you have as a human. Do I fight? Do I give in? Do I become the victim? Or do I fight? Do I say, yes, I can, because for whatever, verbally or non-verbally, and go for it?
I love that it goes for you. I think you have, you have something that I probably don't. Because some people, like me, when I have that flight, fight, or freeze response, some people freeze up, right?
Yeah.
I know there's also a discussion, there's like a fourth response where you fawn, where you accommodate, appease, but some people either fight, run away, flight, or just completely freeze up.
What are you seeing with your female clients right now on whether we're talking about self-limiting beliefs or we're just talking about like where they get stuck? What are you seeing a lot of right now?
What's coming to mind right now is, how do we define authority for ourselves, right? Because first of all, I have had clients who are highly accomplished professionals who have done amazing things. And then I ask them, okay, what do you think about your authority? They're like, oh, I don't want to think about me having authority. Authority is like power and oppressive. I'm like, are you sure about that? Are you sure about that? And then I have had clients who, felt that their authority was defined by whether other people, like let's say, like a client of mine, she's like the youngest and the only female manager at this tech company that's mostly male, pale, and stale at the top. Surprise, surprise, right? And she was feeling very frustrated because she was going through the interview process to get promoted, which she absolutely deserved and got. But she felt that her authority was limited by what other people thought about her capacity to do the job. She felt that if her colleagues and superiors didn't think that she could do it, then it meant she did not have the authority to do the job.
Is that her story or is that actual fact, in your opinion?
That's the story.
Right.
That's the story she had. And so this kind of ties back to your earlier question, like how can limiting beliefs, be a detriment? Like if you really feel that having authority is beyond your control, then it's hard to see yourself as having authority. Then it's hard to be authoritative in conversations. And when you're not authoritative, then people won't see you as a leader. And then it just becomes harder and harder to make the kind of progress that you can make as a leader, as a professional, as a manager. So what we did in the coaching was like, no, let's redefine what it actually means to have authority. I did a coaching series with this particular client of mine, a different client, who used to be in the Church of Latter-day Saints. And she was taught that authority was something that only the patriarchs, the male leaders within the church, get to have. And then she left that church and she realized she can unlearn, she can sort of flip all those teachings on its head. And then she arrived at the conclusion that she has authority because she exists. And the authority, you have the authority to make decisions for yourself. You have the authority to decide, who you want to be and how to see yourself. And you have authority because you have experience and expertise and knowledge and skills, right? All the different ways you can define authority. So my client, the other client, I'm going to go back to the client who was getting promoted. And so I asked her to redefine authority in a way that is within her control. I asked her to think about, okay, just think about the time when you first were going to go for this promotion and you thought, I can do it.
I would submit that authority is choice.
Yes, that's it. Authority is choice.
So when you choose, when you decide that you are worthy of, or no, not even worthy, you are able to make a contribution as a subject matter expert. So the three things I would use in replacement of the word authority, if it doesn't land for somebody in a way that they can hear it, I use choice. I would use choice. I would use subject matter expert and thought leader.
Excellent. That's great.
Here's the thing. When somebody starts a sentence with, I think, they think, I'm already done. I'm done. There is no cheese there to worry about what you think people think, because you're wrong. You're going to be wrong. You're absolutely positively going to be wrong. It's the story I tell about the woman in the meeting that makes a face when you present and you swear she hates you and she hates your ideas and she hates everything about you. And now you have a tude about this particular woman. Turns out she had gas from her lunch. Okay? So back up the bus and don't start a sentence with, I think they're going to think.
I love it. And I would add, if you think they think, it's you thinking that. You have the thought about you. That's your thought.
It's your story. It's not them thinking that. It's your freaking story about what they think. How are you qualified to be in somebody else's brain? How can we allow women to start a sentence with, I think they think I'm an idiot. I think they think I'm not capable. I think they think I'm not. What the hell are you doing burning calories, worrying about what somebody else is thinking? It's none of your business what somebody else thinks of you. That is the point. I don't know what I can do to help the process, but women, ladies, people, everybody, do not spend and burn calories worrying about what you think people think, because it's not really any fun and it's probably wrong.
Yes. And I think it becomes easier for us to stop it when we just recognize this is not the truth of the universe. And this is happening because we've been taught to do this. This is the default programming we've been exposed to for several decades, many decades, most decades of our lives. No one really taught us how to question it and to make decisions for ourselves that serve what we actually want.
Exactly. Yeah, it took me decades. So on that note, I'm going to ask you, if you had an opportunity to talk to your 30-year-old self, what would you tell her?
If I had an opportunity to talk to my 30-year-old self, I would tell her, don't be so hard on yourself. Your wildest dreams are coming true. And if it feels really, really bad right now where you are, that's because you're about to head into your biggest breakthrough yet.
I don't know why I'm whispering, but I felt the need to say that's really awesome.
I think my 42-year-old self also needs to hear it again.
So here's a suggestion. Write yourself a note, seal it, and put a date on your calendar to open that envelope, because you're writing a letter to your future self. That's what I want you to do. That'd be fun, right? Okay, so what do you want to leave everybody with? Because we're going to wrap up. What's any words of wisdom, thoughts, ideas, takeaways, to-dos? I want you to leave them with one thing.
Come on over to my website, JamieLeeCoach.com, JamieLeeCoach.com. And I have a really fun and quick quiz that you can take. It's going to take you about 3 minutes, and it's going to let you know what leadership archetype is. And what does this mean? It's going to tell you what your superpowers are. It's going to tell you what others think about you, and it's going to give you very if you just want the answer, I'll give it to you. And I'm going to give you very specific custom tips on how to improve your communication, leadership, self-advocacy according to your archetype so you can make better headway. And yes, you'll have to enter your email. You'll opt into my newsletter. Of course, you can opt out at any time, but this way you'll get invites, tips, etc.
Love it. I'll be right there. I'm coming in. I want to know what my archetype is. Jamie, this was absolutely a delight. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And people, make it a great day. Thanks for being here. Thank you so much for listening to Possibilities with Monique De Maio, where we unpack life as a female mover and shaker. If you like the show, please consider liking it, or better still, subscribing to it and leaving us a rating. It truly does help. Also, you can pick up my book, The 7 Secrets to Creating a Life You Love, a practical guide for women in leadership. You can find the book, other episodes of this podcast, and how to stay in touch at MoniqueDeMaio.com. DEMAIO. I look forward to seeing you again soon. With gratitude, Monique.